Something unusual is being talked about in financial and diplomatic circles right now, and most people outside of those rooms have no idea it's happening. There are growing signs, reported across multiple international outlets and economic policy briefings, that three of the world's most significant economic blocs, Europe, the United Arab Emirates, and Japan, are simultaneously increasing their strategic focus on Canada as a long-term investment and trade partner. Not because of charity, not because of politics, but because analysts and investors in those regions increasingly see Canada as one of the few remaining destinations that offers political stability, democratic institutions, rule of law, and genuine physical resources all in one place. Whether this adds up to what some observers are already calling a quiet triple alliance, and whether Mark Carney's government can actually deliver on the opportunity it appears to be building, those are the questions worth asking out loud. Welcome to Strategic Dynamics Edge, the channel where we go deeper than the headlines, break down the real power moves in global economics, and help you understand what it all actually means. If you are new here, hit subscribe right now and tap the bell, because what we cover here is the kind of analysis most channels either don't have time for or don't want to go into this honestly. And today, we are going to go there. Stick with us, because the second half of this video is where it gets really important. Before we go any further, a quick and important disclaimer. Everything discussed in this video is drawn from publicly reported information, policy analysis, and economic commentary. Investment figures and projections we mention are estimates reported in briefings and analysis. They are not confirmed contracts. This is not financial advice. We are here to inform, to analyze, and to raise the right questions, not to make guarantees about the future. Now, with that said, let's get into it. To understand why international interest in Canada seems to be growing at this particular moment, you have to start with the global context, because the world that foreign governments and institutional investors are looking at right now is genuinely unstable in ways that are pushing serious money towards safer ground. The United States, which served as the anchor of global trade stability for most of the past century, is going through what analysts describe as an unprecedented period of policy unpredictability. Tariff regimes have shifted rapidly. Trade relationships that took decades to build are being questioned. Confidence in the long-term consistency of American economic policy has, according to multiple international business surveys, declined meaningfully among institutional investors outside the US. Meanwhile, China has been using economic access more explicitly as a geopolitical instrument, and countries that built deep dependencies on Chinese supply chains are now actively trying to reduce that exposure. Russia is effectively isolated from Western capital markets, and within Europe itself, the ongoing consequences of the Ukraine conflict, particularly the energy crisis it triggered, have left governments in Berlin, Paris, and Brussels searching urgently for reliable resource and trade partners outside their traditional network. In that environment, analysts note, Canada presents a profile that is increasingly rare on the global stage. It has significant reserves of critical minerals. It has political stability and democratic governance. Its legal and regulatory systems are internationally recognized as transparent and reliable. And it sits at the intersection of Atlantic and Pacific trade routes. The argument being made in foreign policy and investment circles, and it is worth stating clearly that this is an argument and an emerging trend rather than a done deal, is that Canada is structurally well positioned to benefit from global realignment if it can execute on the opportunity in front of it. What Carney's government appears to be doing, based on reported diplomatic activity and public statements, is trying to accelerate that positioning through structured engagement with three specific partners simultaneously. The European dimension of this story has the longest historical foundation. Canada and the European Union have had CETA, the Comprehensive Economic and Trade Agreement, in place since 2017. But trade economists and policy analysts have noted for years that the agreement underperformed its potential, with European businesses remaining cautious about Canadian regulatory complexity and vice versa. What appears to have changed, according to reports from European policy observers, is the combination of urgency around energy security following the Ukraine crisis and a renewed European interest in diversifying away from supply chains, concentrated in China or dependent on politically volatile regions. Canada has lithium, cobalt, nickel, uranium, and rare earth minerals that European manufacturers increasingly need for electric vehicle production and renewable energy infrastructure. Several European governments have reportedly opened formal discussions around preferential supply chain agreements for these materials. The specific investment figures being cited in background briefings vary widely and have not been independently confirmed to the degree that would allow us to present them as hard numbers, but the directional shift in European investment interest toward Canadian critical minerals is reported consistently across multiple financial and diplomatic sources. Mark Carney's credibility, specifically in European financial and policy circles, built through his tenure at the Bank of England and his visibility at institutions like the G7 and World Economic Forum, is cited by analysts as a meaningful factor in why these conversations have moved faster under his government than they did previously. The Japan relationship carries a different kind of strategic logic, and it is arguably the most structurally significant of the three when you look at the long-term picture. Japan's government has been publicly explicit, in ways that are unusual for Tokyo's traditionally cautious diplomatic language, about its need to build supply chains that reduce dependence on Chinese manufacturing across sectors ranging from semiconductors to pharmaceuticals to the metals that go into defense equipment. Japan is also rearming. Its defense budget has been publicly expanded in ways not seen since the post-war period, and it needs reliable sources of the raw and processed materials that go into that buildup. Canada, given its geographic position on the Pacific Rim, its resource base, and its alignment with the Democratic Alliance network that Japan operates within, is described by Japanese economic analysts as a high-priority partner for this diversification effort. Reports from trade and logistics observers suggest that Japanese capital is beginning to flow into Canadian mining ventures, hydrogen production projects, and Pacific Coast port infrastructure. Infrastructure that, if the reported expansion plans materialize, would meaningfully increase Canada's capacity to move goods across the Pacific efficiently and at scale. Prince Rupert in British Columbia is consistently mentioned in these discussions as a priority site. Perhaps most significantly, analysts point to signs of a technology transfer dimension in the Japan relationship that goes beyond simple resource extraction. The suggestion, and it remains a suggestion based on reported government discussions rather than confirmed agreements, is that Japanese manufacturing expertise could be deployed inside Canadian industrial facilities in ways that would help Canada process raw materials into higher value products domestically, rather than exporting unprocessed inputs. If that happens at scale, it would represent a meaningful shift away from the resource extraction model that has historically limited Canada's ability to capture full value from its own natural wealth. The UAE component of this story is the one that surprised most observers when it began to emerge in reporting. And it is also the one that reveals perhaps the most about how Carney's approach differs from previous Canadian economic diplomacy. The UAE's sovereign wealth vehicles, particularly Abu Dhabi's, are among the most active capital allocators in the world, with reported assets running into the hundreds of billions of dollars deployed across real estate, technology, agricultural land, and infrastructure globally. Historically, Canadian officials acknowledge the relationship between Ottawa and Abu Dhabi was managed at a bureaucratic level that did not translate into significant capital flows. What appears to have changed, based on reported meetings and public statements from both sides, is that Carney engaged directly with UAE decision-makers at a level of personal relationship and financial credibility that previous Canadian leaders had not reached. His pitch, as described in policy commentary, reportedly centered on three things the UAE is genuinely prioritizing right now: food security, clean energy technology, and credibility in Western capital markets. Canada is one of the world's largest food exporters. It is building a clean technology and hydrogen sector. And its financial regulatory framework is consistently rated among the most stable and transparent globally, which matters significantly to Gulf institutions working to deepen their presence in international markets. Reported discussions between Canadian and UAE officials describe interest in co-investment arrangements that would see UAE capital flowing into Canadian agri-food and hydrogen development, alongside a financial services corridor designed to make it easier for UAE institutions and Canadian pension funds, which themselves manage hundreds of billions in assets, to co-invest in infrastructure projects both domestically and in third markets around the world. That last element, the co-investment in third-party markets, is what analysts describe as genuinely new ground for Canadian economic statecraft. Rather than simply positioning Canada as a destination for foreign capital, it would make Canada a partner in deploying capital globally, a qualitative upgrade in how this country operates on the world economic stage. Taken together, these three relationships, if the reported frameworks hold and the capital commitments materialize, represent a scale of potential economic activity that analysts describe as historically significant for Canada. Estimates cited in investment policy discussions, and again these are estimates rather than confirmed figures, suggest that combined investment activity across critical minerals, clean energy, Pacific logistics, agri-food, and financial services, co-investment could represent something in the range of $150 to $200 billion over the coming decade. It is important to hold that number carefully. In international economic diplomacy, reported commitments go through multiple stages before they become actual contracts, and actual contracts go through more stages before they become real projects with workers and machinery on the ground. Canada's track record on large resource and infrastructure projects, as any honest analyst will acknowledge, includes multiple examples of ambitious announcements that stalled in regulatory review, Indigenous consultation processes, infrastructure bottlenecks, or simply changing market conditions. Australia, Norway, Chile, and Namibia are all actively competing for the same international investment capital. Canada does not have a monopoly on attractiveness to foreign investors, and execution matters more than architecture in determining whether any of this actually transforms the Canadian economy. The geographic distribution of potential impact, based on where the relevant resources and infrastructure are located, would be heavily concentrated in British Columbia, Ontario, Quebec, Saskatchewan, and the territories containing the largest critical mineral deposits. The Ring of Fire region in northern Ontario, which has been discussed as a transformational economic opportunity for over 20 years, without fully realizing that potential, is reportedly receiving a new level of serious attention from Japanese and European investors that previous rounds of interest did not sustain. Alberta, despite the political friction between its provincial government and the Carney federal government, holds resources that market logic suggests international capital will find its way to regardless of political temperature. Quebec's aluminum smelting capacity and hydroelectric infrastructure, analysts note, maps particularly well onto what European clean manufacturing investors are looking for. The risks that deserve honest attention alongside the opportunity are real. The most obvious is the American relationship. Canada is deepening structured long-term commitments with partners that the current U.S. administration views, to varying degrees, as competitors or complications in the global economic order. Europe and Washington are in a managed but genuinely tense trade standoff. Japan is deliberately building supply chains that reduce reliance on American-controlled networks. The UAE has warm but complicated ties with Washington. When Canada moves closer to all three simultaneously, it raises a legitimate question about how the United States will interpret that realignment, particularly at a moment when the Canada-US relationship is already under significant strain from tariff disputes and long-standing resource trade conflicts. Carney's government is framing this carefully as diversification rather than realignment, the argument being that a Canada with multiple strong economic relationships is a more valuable partner for the US as well, not a less reliable one. That argument has strategic merit. Whether Washington accepts that framing, particularly in the current political environment, is genuinely uncertain.